You're watching a BBC News 24 special report, continuing our coverage also on BBC One.
Good evening. There can be few people now who know nothing of the extraordinary and horrifying events of this afternoon in the United States. Well, for the next half hour, we're going to focus on how Americans first learned of the terrorist attacks, how they were kept informed of the latest appalling details, and how Americans have been reacting. We'll hear from one of the US network's correspondents in New York, from a former White House insider, and from one of the most senior American journalists here in London. First, though, here's ABC News anchorman Peter Jennings as the scale of the disaster began to hit home.
That many thousands of people work in the Twin Trade Towers in New York City, many thousands of people at the work in the Pentagon. There have been 2 aircraft at least today which have gone down with passenger loads on board, and in fact there has been a 3rd crash in Pennsylvania, which I shall bring you up to date on in just a moment. But we've had a written statement from American Airlines this morning, and let me just read it to you, or parts of it as it come. American Airlines confirms it lost 2 aircraft in what it describes as tragic incidents this morning. There was Flight 11, which was a Boeing 767 en route from Boston to Los Angeles with 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants, and 2 pilots on board. That aircraft was hijacked, to the best of our knowledge, and flown into the trade towers in New York. And Flight 77, a Boeing 757, offering from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles with 58 passengers and 4 flight attendants and 2 pilots. That aircraft is a little more uncertain. That is not a huge, it's a big aircraft, 757, but we're not certain whether that's the one that went into the Pentagon or whether it's one of the other aircraft that went into the Twin Trade Towers. But the government has now shut down the entire air traffic system in the United States.
Obviously, Peter, I've also learned that one of the planes that went into the World Trade Tower was tracked by the FAA. They knew, I don't know if they knew it was hijacked or if they just knew something was wrong. Obviously, it had deviated from its flight path. They were able to track it on radar, and they did track it to Lower Manhattan. That is the latest we know about the flight.
Lisa, this may seem an awfully dumb question, but given the fact that the airlines, the major airlines, operate in such an intensely coordinated way, at least with their own operation centers, how is United Flight 175, a 767 from Boston to Los Angeles, thought to be missing and unaccounted for?
Well, all United is saying is that they are, quote, concerned about that flight. What I believe is that probably that flight was hijacked as well. Where it is right now, I'm sure perhaps the FAA, the FBI, and those folks know where it is. We are not being told, but there may still be another plane flying out there that has not yet crashed or landed or whatever will happen to it. But that flight is apparently at least unaccounted for at this time as far as public release. I'm sure someone knows where that flight is.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much then. Lisa Stark in Seattle today. Thought she was in Washington, covers aviation for us. Barbara Starr, one of our principal reporters at the Pentagon, I think is on the line as well. Barbara? Barbara, do you hear me? Barbara Starr?
Yes, Peter, I'm standing outside the Pentagon. About 10 or 15 minutes ago, we saw 50 to 75 military personnel move onto the helipad. They are stretcher-bearer volunteers. They have been assembled to go in and recover any potentially dead or wounded. And we have talked to an eyewitness who was down on the helipad earlier this morning, where the fire is, of course, still ongoing. He reported seeing more than a dozen wounded personnel earlier this morning. We have seen ambulances carry people off. About an hour ago, we saw emergency medical personnel bringing out a woman and a small child in their arms. So the situation here remains quite unsettled.
Can you describe a little more generally what unsettled mean? Is it calm? Is there chaos?
We have had periods of what can only be described as chaos. About 15 minutes ago, security personnel came through again and told us to start running, to move back, that there was another aircraft moving up the Potomac River from the south at a high rate of speed. Well, that apparently did not occur, and we have now moved back to our original camera position. So the police are quite at a point of quite high tension here this morning, and any little ripple is having them move people back to stay away from the building. They are extremely concerned about another attack and a potential additional explosion. They are taking every precaution.
Understandable. Barbara, the portion of the building that was breached when the aircraft crashed into it, do you know what happens in that part of the building?
Well, we're looking at it right now. Fire trucks are still pouring water more than an hour or better after the explosion onto the flames. This has occurred where the helipad is, a helicopter pad with a small control tower where military helicopters, and including Air Force One helicopters, take off and land regularly. A very senior military official told us he heard an explosion on the 5th floor of the Pentagon, and he believes that that's where the impact was. But looking at the side of the building, you can see smoke and flames, and the building is singed, literally top to bottom. Water is continuing to be poured on the flames by fire companies.
Thank you, Barbara Starr, very much. We've just seen a helicopter flying over the center portion of the District of Columbia. Maybe we can get another glimpse at that. It's gone out of frame now. I am wondering now whether or not...
Well, that's how our colleagues in ABC News in the United States saw events unfold there. And in the past few moments, we've had some breaking news from the White House traveling press corps who with President Bush, who's in Nebraska. The White House is now saying that President Bush is to fly back to Washington, D.C. from Offutt Air Force Base, which is Strategic Air Command headquarters in Nebraska. He is to fly back to Washington. We're not sure when he will arrive, but obviously we'll keep you abreast of developments. Now, Tom Reed is the London bureau chief of the Washington Post. He joins us here in the studio. Tom, I'm used to seeking your expertise on things, but just let me ask you as an ordinary American citizen what your thoughts are on what we've seen today.
I feel horrible. It's horrendous. It's just terrible. I feel that we're at war. I wasn't alive on Pearl Harbor Day, but it feels like Pearl Harbor Day. We lost 2,000 Americans in Pearl Harbor. I'm afraid we've lost a heck of a lot more today. I just feel we're at war.
How do you think the operation of the United States government is going to continue? You know Washington very well. It's a small city. They've all gone home.
Oh, they can operate the government. You know, they can. We've had these budget shutdowns. We've had reasons why the government didn't operate. It's a little bothered me, I have to say, a little bit that our president was hopping around from Florida to Louisiana to Nebraska. I'm glad he's going back to Washington. I wish he'd gone straight back. Our government will function fine. I'm not too worried about that. It's these people who are dead and the sense that somebody attacked our country. That's what's really scary for me. And my feeling is the only rational response for a government that's just been attacked and had thousands of people killed is to try to fight back.
I mean, you're obviously no doubt there has to be some kind of retaliation.
I'm in no doubt of that. Yeah, I think if we don't do it, somebody will come get us again, yeah. The difference with Pearl Harbor is we knew who the enemy was in Pearl Harbor. That launched us into a very difficult four-year war, but at least we knew who we were fighting. Here, we don't know what to do.
Now, we're hearing reports that there may be another building in New York which may be about to collapse, which explains some of the terrible difficulties the emergency services are having there right on the southern tip of Manhattan, right beside the World Trade Center. Tom, the World Trade Center is one of the obvious symbols, not just of America, but of world capitalism, or how the markets work in this country. The Pentagon is the clearest symbol of American power.
Yeah.
It's fairly obvious whoever did this was deliberately trying to humiliate as best they could the United States.
Well, absolutely. And also the World Trade Center, if you happen to have an airplane, is probably relatively easy to hit. But it is reminiscent of that awful day in '98 when two of our embassies were hit within 2 minutes. Clearly a coordinated attack, and it takes, this requires a lot more coordination, I would say. So it's really horrendous. Now the other building in Lower Manhattan, I think the World Trade Center, we know the two towers, but there are about 6 buildings that are all part of the World Trade Center. They're all pretty close or even connected. So I wouldn't be surprised if fire had spread from one to the other, and those are now going.
When we talk about the way in which Americans must be viewing these pictures tonight, how do you think they'll be feeling? I mean, have you been in contact with friends and relatives in the United States?
Well, yeah, I have 2 kids in America, and my wife and I had a pretty frantic time finding them and making sure they were okay, which they were, thank God. I've had people pouring into my office here in London all day, Americans saying, just get me in touch, just let me get home to my family. I can't get in touch with America either, you know, but that's what they want.
Tom, there we must leave it. Thank you.
Now we're going to go straight over to New York, to Manhattan, to talk to John Berman, a reporter for ABC. John, what can you tell us about these reports that there are dangers of another building collapsing?
There are dangers of another building collapsing right there on the street near where the Twin Towers have already collapsed. Those people who have been down there say the smoke is still piling into the sky. There's about a foot of debris on the ground. The situation is still very tenuous. We're told that officials have been told to back off from the area completely because they are very worried that another building is very close to coming down.
So what can they do in terms of the emergency operation for the World Trade Center Twin Towers?
Well, unfortunately, they can't do much right now. They're very concerned about the remaining structure in those two buildings, if they are safe. They're concerned about the buildings nearby, and they're concerned about the air. It's not just smoke that's in the air right now. It's floating debris. It's particles. The cars and ambulances that are racing from there are covered in soot. The people who come out of there, the firemen, are covered in soot. I've seen them head into showers, into makeshift showers with fire hoses to clean off. It is a bad scene down there right now, and it might be some time before any real search and rescue operation does begin.
Tell us just how it's been for you and your team actually trying to report this in Manhattan.
It's been a crazy day. What happened was we get to work just as the first plane ran into one of the Twin Towers, and a lot of people from ABC and other news organizations raced downtown immediately. By the time they got here, the second building had already been hit, and that's when the buildings fell down. It was a staggering sight. It was as if the whole lower part of the city let go with a collective scream, and there was a rumble that you could feel not just in your ears but in your entire body. It was really stunning. And since the buildings went down, it's just been amazing to see how many officials, firefighters are trying to help out, trying to get as close as they can. There have been people evacuated from the scene. People who are as high up as 88 stories in the building were evacuated and have survived. So there are some good stories, but there's a fear of many people being killed.
Because of course these buildings were never designed to be evacuated at high speed. What can be done now for the people who are believed still to be inside there?
Well, unfortunately, Americans have had some experience with evacuating or trying to get people out of buildings that have been demolished. Oklahoma City, of course, the federal building there was exploded, and people were pulled out of that for hours and hours, and in some cases days afterwards alive. These buildings behind me have just been demolished. It is unclear how many people may still be buried in there, how many people may be alive, how many people dead. I did talk to one firefighter who was down there when one of the buildings collapsed, and he was temporarily covered in soot and ashes and debris, and he actually had to dig himself out. And then he raced back to a command center and showered off, and he could be right back in there now trying to help other people.
John, we know that more than 100 hospitals are involved in trying to help the casualties. What reports have you managed to gather from the hospitals about the kinds of injuries and about just the state of the casualties?
Everything you can imagine. All the hospitals around here are filled with people now. We hear some hospitals have 100, some 200, some people have 4 people who have come in and died. It's so big right now, it's hard to get your arms around exactly what's happening, how many people have been killed or wounded. There are no reliable numbers yet. We have spoken to a few hospitals who are trying to help as many wounded as possible, and there are calls out right now for blood donors, and of course the most rare types of blood available. They want as much of that as they can get. O negative, they're calling out anyone who may be able to donate that type of blood. Please go to a donor center right now.
John, we'll leave it there, but many thanks.
Well, it's just been confirmed that President George Bush is now on his way back to the White House. Earlier, he was flown aboard Air Force One to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where he addressed the media. He said freedom itself was attacked today, and freedom would be defended.
I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test.